Hello BookTube. Thought I'd do a little catch-up video. Sunday morning here in Vermont, rainy, but the leaves are all on the trees now, and a lot of the flowering trees are at their best right now, and you walk outside and you just smell it. It's wonderful. And the farmers love the rain. We love the farmers. So, books. Well, I start off the week with a catalog, and one of my favorite catalogs. They occasionally cost me a great deal of money, but I always love what they do. And it's a Folio Society Summer Collection, May 2018. The catalogs are just so much fun to go through. I mean, Japanese Tales, Maigret. If you're a mystery fan and you haven't read those, I recommend them. I really enjoy them. Oh, Steppenwolf. Not my favorite cover on that one, but wonderful novel. I Am Legend. So, you know, these things come. We just purchased the first of the 3 hornblowers, which I'm absolutely delighted with. Out of this catalog, probably what stood out to me the most was this Anglo-Saxon. And it's by James Campbell. Beautiful looking thing. See, it's 2 volumes in the slipcase. And one, I believe, is photography. Yeah, look at that. So that thing would set you back how much? Do they have it on here? Well, let's find out. I usually have a price list here somewhere. So let's see. Oh, here's the Jane Austen collection for those of you who are Jane Austen fans. I know there's a lot. I also like this. This is the King Tut, Howard Carter, right there. South Polar Times, Snow Leopard by Mathiasen. And here's the Anglo-Saxons, 180 bucks. Well worth it, but not always easy to justify. But, and then other than the catalog, this week's New York Review of Books, this is June 7, 2018. One of my favorite literary journals. I read the London Review. I don't get the Times Literary Supplement. I'm sort of try to budget myself on these, but I've only read 1 article in here, and that's all I've had. It's just been a very busy week at work, but a good week. We get a lot done. The construction is basically, we're waiting for some finish up on the painting and the carpet to go in, and grand opening time. So it's very exciting at our library. So chaos reigns, but it's controlled chaos, or so I tell myself. But this article is A Fantastic Truth About China by Alec Ash. And he's discussing Chinese science fiction. And the featured volumes are Invisible Planets, Contemporary Chinese Science Fiction and Translation, translated from the Chinese and edited by Ken Liu. And then Touchable Unreality, edited by Neil Clark, Beijing. And that one I was unable to find on Amazon. So let me see, I'm not sure how I'm doing here. And it's a wonderful article about how Chinese science fiction operates in the greater culture. One of the volumes in here that I have read that they discuss was The 3-Body Problem, which I very much enjoyed. I have not read the next 2, but I do intend to. So excellent, excellent there. And you know, you get all your ads, and the usual New York Review of Books stuff. So about what I've been reading the last week or so, I have my little reading journal here because one of the volumes I don't have here. I actually purchased it for the library, read it, which I often do, and then now it's being processed, so I didn't bring it home with me. And that was Packing My Library by Alberto Manguel. And I am a huge fan of his. I've read so many things he's done. I think his Dictionary of Imaginary Places is a landmark for not only writers of fantasy as a resource, but for poets. But there's, and maybe I can link some videos of his library in France. Was one of the great personal libraries I've ever seen in my life. It would have to have been one of the finer working home personal libraries in the world. And packing my library is a story of him and some friends actually packing that library up and moving out of that wonderful French house in the countryside and moving to New York City, leaving his books boxed, and then moving down to Argentina to become the head of the National Library. The book fell flat for me. It didn't have the verve, didn't have the life, the sparkle of many of his other books. It's a short thing. It was good. It was worth reading. It does talk about how it is. I've lost a library myself, and it's traumatic. Nobody likes it. But there was something missing in the book. I don't know, a spark is a silly way to say it, but it didn't come alive on the page. It was a disconnect of some sort, and it was sort of disappointing. Maybe that disconnect is caused by the trauma he went through with losing his library. I don't know. But it was not my favorite of his books. In fact, I don't do stars and all that stuff because I would not be consistent. But for me, it just didn't. And I was disappointed. Let's leave it at that. So I'm not sorry I read it. Then I gave myself a little bit of fun, and I read a new Star Trek novel. It's not new, but it says new Star Trek novel. Planet of Judgment by Joe Haldeman, winner of the Hugo and Nebula Awards. So there's that. I enjoyed it. It's a short thing. How do you like this ad in here? I gotta take this out. You can get artwork. Actually, probably worth money, yeah. Basically, Enterprise is put on a planet of judgment. The technology doesn't work. It is a complex subplot. Physics doesn't work. And they're up against several alien races that have their own agendas, as they always would. And it puts them to the test. It was fast-paced, very interesting world building, but in broad strokes. I mean, it wasn't massively detailed. And I very much enjoyed it. So it was a good break. Like I say, it's a short little novel. And when did this come out? It was... This one was 1977, so I've had that one more than once in my life, so it was a good read. The next thing I read, speaking of Folio Society, when I bought the Hornblower set, well, I guess you can't see it, it's above the Patrick O'Brien there. When I bought the Hornblower set, they send you a free surprise book, and they sent me one that seems like everybody but me knew about. Penelope Fitzgerald, the Blue Flower. It's in one of these slipcases. Sort of interesting looking thing. And introduced by Neil Mukherjee. Hope I'm not brutalizing that. Illustrations by James Albin. London Folio Society. And this thing is 1995 was the first time this novel was published, and the Folio Society is 2015, and I just picked it up, not really knowing. I had a few people make comments when they saw it on the haul, tell me that it was worth my time, and they were absolutely right. It's a novel based on the life of Novalis, and those of you who are into German Romanticism and all that would know who he is. And now, if I had known that in even more detail going in, I probably would have avoided it even more. But I do like some of the German romantics. And you have an appearance in here by Goethe, whose travel writing I really enjoy. I like this. I really, really like this. And I was surprised at how much I liked it. I like German writers often, Hermann Hesse, Thomas Mann, Günter Grass, but a story by an English novelist set in Germany with that romantic era background and all that, I didn't know, and it was a wonderful novel. I'm glad I read it. And then to get away from fiction a little bit, I read Those Turbulent Sons of Freedom. This was sent to me by Steve Donahue. Ethan Allen's Green Mountain Boys and the American Revolution by Christopher S. Wren. Lovely end papers. Actually, they're on the other side of the lakes on either side of us and the river. All that, I don't know if you can see it. This just came out this month, May 2018. It's Simon & Schuster, New York. And Christopher Wren is an interesting character. He's was a foreign correspondent, reporter, and editor for the New York Times for nearly 3 decades, heading its news bureaus in Moscow, Cairo, Beijing, Ottawa, and Johannesburg. He's a visiting professor at Dartmouth College in its Master's of Arts and Liberal Study program. Excuse me. Now, sorry about that. Must have swallowed a frog or something. So Dartmouth is right up the road here. And I read this and was talking a little bit online with Steve Donahue about it. He made the point that because of this author's background, he was probably going to be somewhat immune to myth making. I mean, he's a very seasoned and accomplished reporter and academic if he's teaching at Dartmouth. And I read it, was thrilled with it. It's basically the story of the founding of Vermont. Vermont is that odd New England state that was probably settled primarily last, was settled last. There's vast sections of Maine that are pure wilderness, of course. Vermont was a wilderness area heavily involved in the French and Indian War. The troops would come down from French Canada. Colonial troops would move through the area from the lower New England states. And during that period, some of these frontier types from the British colonies saw in the land, which was it still is a tough land. It's rock and mountain and steep gorges. And that was a farm in a time of where you had your family farm. This was a very tough place to farm. But it was land, and basically unclaimed land, or claimed, but not much was done with it. And the 2 claimants were New York and New Hampshire. And a cash-strapped governor of New Hampshire, Benning Wentworth, started giving grants to these people from southern New England who had a very different lifestyle than what you'd find in New York. New York was huge landlords, sharecroppers, tenant farmers. In New England, you tend to have your own family farm. And when groups of people from the southern New England states started moving into Vermont, it was called the New Hampshire Grants, they wanted their own land. They tended to be either misfits where they came from, independent thinkers that didn't like the conservative nature of the communities they were from, or they were just the sons and daughters of families who had many, many children and not a lot of land, so the more you subdivide it, the less you have. So they came up to a very harsh land with brutal winters. The forests were so thick that you couldn't bring livestock. You couldn't even use a horse. You would go by foot, and over a couple summers, you'd clear enough land so that you could put up a small cabin, bark, roof, and then you bring up livestock, and then you bring up your family. And so it was a rough way to hew out a farm in the wilderness. And they were scattered farms, but little places like Bennington, named after Benning Whitworth, became centers. Westminster on the Connecticut River became a center. And the author goes through this story. And one of the things you take away from it, I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but one of the things you take away from it is, in the American Revolution, Vermont was at war with New York. Vermont became independent, declared its independence. The state, the house where they did it, the Constitution House, is a couple miles down the road from me. Their interest was not the American Revolution. They had a battle, a massacre, and a fight against New Yorkers, is what they call them, in Westminster, right down the road. And that happened before Lexington, conquered Lexington, like a month before. And these guys would come riding out of the hills, and they were some tough guys. And the Green Mountain Boys is the most famous group of them. And we hear about Ethan Allen and Seth Warner, who, to me, looms largest. Remember Baker, a teenager in the French and Indian War and a ranger, and also involved in the Revolution. So, a long, independent, long time this state was before it ever was allowed to join the Union, and it was the first state to join the Union after the original 13. New York kept blocking it, but Vermont was at war with New York, and was for a long time, and was quite successful. Large swaths of upstate New York were aligned with Vermont, and large swaths of New Hampshire on the other side of the Connecticut River, including Dartmouth. So a lot of times that history is read through looking back and having this vision of the American Revolution and presupposing the establishment of the United States. No, that's not what these guys were fighting for. They were fighting for their own farms and their own land and their own title to that land, and everything was land back then. And it's a fascinating story. The author doesn't make a misstep. It's fast-paced, brings you in, you see the war, you see the battles, you see some horrific things, but it's a great story, and I think he did a great job. So I was pleased to read it. I was very pleased to read it. And then another gift from Steve, because I'm a librarian and love all things library as well as all things books. He sent me this book I have never seen before. It's called Library on Wheels, Mary Lemist Titcomb and America's First Bookmobile by Charlie Glenn. Beautiful thing. And amply illustrated. Look at that bookmobile. And it's a fascinating story. She's from over around New Hampshire. Let me see all these old library pictures. She became the head of the library in Rutland, Vermont. She worked with the state library and was one of the first two, some say first, some say second, woman to hold an elected office in the state of Vermont. And she went down to Hagerstown, and here she is. She went down to Hagerstown, and she became their library director. And she ended up establishing, first with a wagon, and then with powered vehicles, bookmobiles, because it was a rural community. Here you go. Look at this. It's a rural community, and she wanted to get the books to everybody. And it's absolutely it's a short thing, absolutely wonderful read, and bookmobiles have played a huge role. I've had people in comment sections in past videos mention bookmobiles in their communities. This is Washington County Bookmobiles. right there. And they had huge success. And it was very, 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 in Hagstown, in Maryland. Very interesting. And she was a very important American librarian. Not just because she did the bookmobiles, but that's a big reason. And the book brings her back to life. I really, really liked it. Her and her sister outlived so much of their family that they were buried in Concord, Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord, Mass. And then the author was able to get, with the help of the cemetery commission there, to get stones for both women, which I thought was wonderful. This thing was published by Abrams Books for Young Readers, New York, and it is, let me see what the date here is, 2018. Absolute joy to read. So if you, I mean, even, it's for young readers, but I enjoyed it and learned a lot from it, and I really appreciate Steve sending it along. I would recommend it. So, what am I reading? Well, right now, I'm reading World War II at Sea, A Global History. Big old thing from Oxford. It's by Craig L. Simons. And it might be a big old thing, but you would think, when did this come out? That writing an entire naval history of World War II, and not from the perspective of a single navy. I've read those before. Samuel Eliot Morison comes to mind. I'm only, I just started it. I'm 92 pages into it, and we've already been through the fall of France. We've been through Norway. We've gotten some background on, all the navies. And fast-paced. Covers a lot of ground. Has no ground. A lot of water, I guess. I'm already irritated with Churchill, who's a hero of mine. But I understand his faults. Seems like it's going to be a really, really good book, so I'm looking forward to it. To continuing it. And then a bit of a reread. And as an aside on the World War II at Sea, I did see Ernest Lee Esten just did a review on a history of, the first volume, I believe, on the history of the Nazis. That was entertaining. I always loved the World War II stuff anyway. And the other thing I'm reading is rereading J.R.R. Tolkien, The Silmarillion. This is, let's see, Houghton Mifflin Company, Boston, 1977. First printing, first American edition. I just finished the Ain Elundale, the music of Ainur. And I'm about to start Valaquenta, Account of the Valar and the Maiar, according to the lore of the Eldar. And then we'll be into the Quenta Silmarillion, the history of the Silmarils proper. So it's been a long, long time since I read this. I really enjoyed the first part. I read it last night. I needed a bit of a break. On BookTube, I've been watching, trying to play some catch up because I have been so busy. I watched BookTube TV, Matt Wall, wonderful BookTube interview show. They had a book olive on yesterday, and I managed to jump into the conversation on that. And each time he does them, they get better and better. He's getting a real hold of this, and he's a great interviewer. He does a good job bouncing between the questions in the comment field, and then going with his own stuff too, because he's right there on site and has a feeling for it. And she was fascinating, absolutely wonderful to listen to. So I've been trying to catch up on some of the videos and the comments, and really get back into the swing of things, and I'm looking forward to the summer. So thank you, BookTube. I hope you have a good weekend.